Good evening, folks. How are you doing today? Hope you've been having a great time. Sorry, we haven't been online for quite a while. Been actually more on Instagram, in recent times, trying to see how Instagram works and if it's suitable for what we try to do here, which is to talk about the various issues that we come across in life from all perspectives humanly possible. And as much as we like to talk about serious issues, we also like to talk about things that are pretty interesting to other people as well. But tonight we're going to be having a very, very interesting conversation, something that's very dear to me, something that I've always, spoken about as often as I can, which is the issue of housing. Nigeria and the rest of Africa, we have so much going on. We have a lot of people who are brains, deep, deep brains. And a little while ago, I put up a post where I was looking for an architect who could have a long discussion on, even if it was a short one, about how we could actually start using local materials to start building in Africa since we have such a huge shortage of affordable housing. Now, of course, quite a few people were here, you're looking for trouble, blah, 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 thinking that we could not find. They keep forgetting that we have so many brains in Africa, so many intellectually inclined people. Most people think that Africans are about Gucci and big chains and that kind of stuff. Yes, we are fine people. We look good. Black don't crack. But also, we have people who look fantastic who are also intelligent and deep academics. Just like our guest tonight, who happens to be an academic as well. And don't mind his looks, because I'm sure when you first see him, you'll be like, is this guy from GQ or something? But I'm sure you'll figure it out somewhere along the line when you start to listen to him. You'll know that, yeah, he's the type of guy that, you would always really, really want to have a conversation with, especially when it comes to the academic things of life. He's an assistant professor. So there's plenty brain there. His name is Dr. Adedoyin Teriba. Dr. Teriba.
Good evening. Thank you for that. I appreciated the GQ connection.
You know why people first lay eyes on you? They'll first be like, okay, who is this guy? Is he an influencer? Is he a movie star? Is he, kind of stuff? People will start wondering. They won't know that you're actually a professor.
Very much so.
That's amazing, So tell me, tell the people watching that, basically, what led you into the academia?
Well, it's so I just want to, first of all, Habib, thank you for just to be in your midst. And I want to just greet everybody a warm and hearty good evening to all of you. But to answer your question, academia found me. It's interesting. This question makes me reflect on my time as an undergraduate student of architecture in northern Nigeria, in Minna, Niger State. I went to FUT Minna, and I'll never forget where I was when this happened. But I was in the lobby area of our hostel, and two of my peers said to me, "Doyin, you would make a great professor." And I said, Haba, no, no. I'm an architect, and that there's no way I'm going to be a professor. And, there is a phrase, it's not so popular in Nigeria, but in the United States, there's a phrase and it goes like this. He who does not, who cannot do, teaches. He who cannot do, teaches. And so at the time, the reason why I said Haba, no, I thought that academia in architecture would be a cop out, would be a cop out to the profession of architecture, and that the profession of architecture consists of designing architecture. So it is poetic justice that I'm an academic, despite my haba, know that I was not going to be an academic. But the other thing I should say before, and again, this is a long tangent to answering your question.
Yeah.
I grew up on the Unilag campus, and so it's also poetic that I am an academic now, having again grown up for many, many years on the Unilag campus. But the short answer to your question is that I went into academia because I wanted to create contemporary Nigerian architecture. And that drive, which started from undergraduate days, led me to academia, led me to doing a PhD in architecture, because in order to be the kind of architect I wanted to be, I had to learn about the history of Nigerian architecture. And that pursuit of history led me into academia.
So you and I have quite a lot in common in terms of the historical part of things, because I happen to be a student of history, and history is my first love. I've always believed that for you to get a solid grasp of anything in life, you have to have some historical context to it, and that would
Right.
broaden your horizon in dealing with issues. And that was what really excited me when I first heard about you. I was like, okay, not just an architect, not just somebody who understands, the concept of using local materials for building, but somebody who also has a historical background to the entire, picture that we were trying to to paint, which was how can we build cheaper houses in Africa? Now, when you look at the likes of India with their massive population, there's so much going on in terms of a mix in the types of building materials that they use. If you go to countries like Ghana, for instance, right now, you actually have people who are building with red bricks in Ghana. When you go to North Africa, you'll see that a huge chunk of their construction is red bricks. But we also have red bricks in a country like Nigeria, but we don't seem to be utilizing that. As of 2021, the price of a block, a 6-inch block, was about roughly 280 naira. As of today, Sandcrete block is 520 naira. Now, when you have well over 22 million units deficiency in terms of affordable housing alone, how come there's such a huge gap in the market and we just are not able to bring the cost of building construction down? What are your thoughts?
Well, so this is you've asked a question that consists of many, many things that need to be unpacked to betray the complexity of it. Because this question indirectly leads to larger questions of economics,
Yeah.
of just the shape of contemporary society in Nigeria. And I'm going to, in order to, so just pardon me as I wax, I'm going to sort of complicate this question, but complicate it in order to give you various sides that need to be grappled with to address this question.
Yeah.
This is a question that I have dealt with. I dealt with even in my undergraduate days because I designed for my final year project. I designed a housing estate that consisted of three types of earners: low income earners, medium income earners, high income earners. I used even stabilized earth blocks,
Okay.
sandcrete, sandcrete as they're called in other areas.
Yeah.
So I'm somewhat familiar with this problem. And affordable housing, as you know, has perennially been an issue that has, vexed, people around the world. I will come back to India because, there was an Indian architect, the first Indian to ever win the most prestigious award in architecture globally called the Pritzker Prize. B.V. Doshi, he actually died early this year, but he
Wow.
designed a housing estate that is quite famous. And I'm going to return to that because that may be his solution, of designing a housing estate in such a way that the occupants would co-design and adapt individual designs is something that I could raise. But the truth of the matter is that the question has to be complicated. What did I mean by I brought up economics?
Yeah.
The idea of affordable housing is a reflection of the exploding population of Nigeria. Um, in pre-modern societies in Nigeria, there wasn't a housing problem. Um, the economics was different. And what I mean by that is that families built their own houses.
Yeah.
You take a place like whether it's northern Nigeria, for instance, that I'm a little bit familiar with. There was a way in which families, neighbors came together to communally, right, build houses, and there was a different sort of system of building, right. You could even say a different kind of economic system. What you said about the increasing costs of building materials in Nigeria is a reflection of the rise of market economics, right? The rise of the mass production of building materials, right? The rise of certain companies having a monopoly, right, on the building of the construction of the production of materials, production of windows, production of doors, production of steel, I-beams, and what have you. One
Mm-hmm.
has to really talk about the economics, right? There's a way in which there are certain, people that have a sort of a monopoly in terms of distribution, in terms of, yes, just in terms of the marketing of these things. Some of these elements come from abroad, right? Increasing, the cost, right? Of whether it's just basic raw materials or even just building elements that are in their finished form. So there is a deeper issue about the kind of market economy that exists, right, in the construction industry. So to really address the cost factor, one has to dig into deeper, right, issues about the kind of economy that one has. And the reason why I am juxtaposing that with just a pre-modern, form of housing, where I said there was no housing shortage in the village. People built, they had land, right? They sourced materials locally, right? The materials were, recyclable, actually, forecasting what has now become fashionable as sustainable architecture. So these are things that need to be addressed, right? You're just reminding me just to go back to what I said about my my project as an undergraduate student when I designed a housing estate. Before I did that, just to give you an example of what we need to deal with.
Yeah.
Before I did that, I produced a questionnaire, and I was inspired by the earth architecture I saw in northern Nigeria. Of course, you had earth architecture in southwest Nigeria, southeast Nigeria as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I produced a questionnaire, and the questionnaire had questions like, if Adedoyin, designed um, a house for you that was made out of earth, stabilized with cement,
Yeah.
and I would design it in such a way that it was funky, cool, snazzy. Would you want to build in this house? All of them said, heck no, that that there's no way they would live in that kind of a house. Why? Because they associated earth with poverty.
Yeah.
They associated earth with backwardness. And so for them, something like a concrete block, as expensive as that may be, right, with rising costs of cement and what have you, to build, optically, it suited their own status more than the more sustainable affordable option that would be designed in such a way that was cool, nevertheless. But they could not, and I had 100% negative.
Yeah.
Not one respondent was willing to try that.
Hmm.
Right. So there are deeper issues here about economics, like I said. And I've also, that's my anecdotes, betrayed other things like psychology, right? When
Yeah.
we're talking about, so these are the things that need to be, I could go on and on and on. I don't want to just, just really take over the whole show. But these are just some of the things, these are some of the deeper issues, because one has to really think about these things in a way that hasn't been thought about them before. It's not just a question of trying to um, ensure that certain building materials are not as expensive, right, as before. It's more than that. It's looking at the whole architecture, no pun intended, the whole architecture of how we're doing economics, the whole architecture of our attitudes toward building materials, our attitudes towards sustainability, right? Our attitudes towards how we build.
Yeah.
These are just some of the things, I will stop for now, but these are just some of the things because there are deeper issues here, right? And it's not just about the economic bottom line. It's not just about obviously, it is about making housing affordable. I get that. But in order to get to that, one has to really cast lights, right, on some of the things we take for granted.
Yeah.
Some of the models of, distribution, how building materials are made, our perception of architecture, how just the whole construction industry as it is right now. There isn't, in my humble opinion, in the Nigerian construction industry, there isn't a lot of different ways, right, of constructing buildings. I mean, you can find that, right, in villages, but in cities like Lagos or Abuja,
Yeah.
there's only one set way, right? And there are only certain companies that have a monopoly as to how things are done.
So I waited patiently for you to get to that particular point because I knew you were eventually going to get there. Now, the monopolies and all of that are the result of either poorly, fashioned policies or no policies at all, or poorly fashioned and in combination with poor implementation. We keep seeing different things happening in different parts of the world. Like, for instance, earlier today, I saw something about the Apple moving their operations out of China and moving to India. And immediately what came to my mind was African leaders are not going to see this as an opportunity. African banks are not going to see this as an opportunity. African businessmen, even if they do see it as an opportunity, the infrastructure is not there to support it. Now, we have a lot of academics, and those academics are not being put in the right space to be able to contribute their knowledge towards the development of Africa as a whole. My own perspective. I'm not sure if I'm 100% right or not. But from my own understanding, if we have the depth of knowledge that is available to us, especially with people like yourself, why do we keep suffering? Is it a case of when you do your papers, white papers and stuff, and you hand it over or send it over to government or to the policymakers, they just don't listen? If it is to the economic teams, for instance, they don't listen. If you send to the banks and say, look, you know what? This is an opportunity that can be tapped into. You're an academic, you're not a business person. So what you're basically doing is you are helping those financial institutions to make more money. Where's the disconnect?
Wow, that's a great question. That's a great question. Um, my experience has been that in other parts of the world, let me just try and think of other places where the sort of policy recommendations are leaving the hands of academics and they're
Yeah,
being put in front of policymakers. Um, so let me start with that, and then just work my way back to Nigeria. But you have certain things called think tanks, organizations with a host of thinkers, right, who are paid to actually make some recommendations. And usually those recommendations uh, find their ways in the hands of those who make policy, and those policymakers then form an informed recommendation based on the insights they are gleaning, right, from thinkers in these think tanks. It's called think tank because it's an organization where it's like a tank full of thinkers. So think tank.
mhm,
I do not know of uh, the fact that Nigeria has many things like that. For instance, why isn't there a sort of think tank that is focused solely on just the issue of housing, where there are academics, right? Maybe they are also part of a university as well, but there are academics that just focus on that, and politicians, those in the Ministry of Housing and what have you, they are reading these things, right, and they invite them to come, and then they excuse me, they
you can,
co yeah,
sorry.
they build something together and make the kind of recommendations you're talking about. So, Habib, the short of it is that there are academics in Nigeria. There have been people that have been, even within the ivory towers in Nigeria, who have been writing about housing, who have been doing things about housing for a very long time. I think, however, this time there needs to be a new form of organization, like a think tank, that can have the ears of those in Aso Rock, right? And those, whether it's in the Senate or whether it's the House of Representatives. And so that, in other words, my sense is that that think tank, right, as an institutional culture, is not there. Um, and I think that, um, but you also really, and some of my colleagues, fellow architectural historians who work on Nigeria have said this for a very, very long time, what I'm about to say.
Yeah,
We don't have, yes, we have academics, but when it comes to architecture and housing and things like that, we don't have a consistent critical culture. That is a culture where there are journals where articles are being written, where policy recommendations could be made in those journals, right? We don't even have in Nigeria, we have a few. I mean, uh, we have a few architectural critics, but it's not a widespread phenomenon. Yes, there are the Nemo, the legendary Nemo Bassis, right, of Guardian, and some other newspapers who have written about architecture here and there sporadically for years, but we don't have a critical mass, right, of people writing on architecture, making the case, making part of what the case you're talking about
yeah,
in our most influential newspapers. So there is, despite the academics that exist, Habib, for the kind of thing that you are looking for, number one, there has to be the rise of the think tank, right, where there are thinkers who can put these things in the ears of the politicians. But also, we also have to have in our newspapers, people who can write authoritatively and critically about the urgency, right, of affordable housing, the urgency of policies that will get to some of the issues that I've been trying to raise, the fundamental issues about economics, the fundamental issues about building materials and what have you. So that's what I'm seeing that is lacking. So that's just a long-winded way to sort of respond to the question that you're raising.
Okay, fantastic. Now you have laid out quite a lot of angles to this. The most pertinent question that anybody will be asking is the issue of demand. So you mentioned something earlier on, which was a case of you did a survey, and several people were like, it has become more of a cultural thing for them to look at the mud bricks as a sign of poverty. Could it be a case of they're not educated enough on the subject, or enough is not being done to market them, and that's why they just cannot see, the value anymore in this? Should there be like a cultural reorientation? So probably if there's a demand, then probably you have something they call reverse integration or whatever it is, and then the industry starts to build. Because presently in Nigeria now, you only have two red brick manufacturing companies, one in Ire, and the other one is in somewhere in Niger State, I believe. And that's it. Now there, people have written stuff about it. People have done interviews and all that. One of the major things that they kept on saying was there was no mud, and I started asking myself, are you saying that in North Africa you have more red sand than sub-Saharan Africa? That's absolutely not true. You do have more of the local, the local materials in sub-Saharan Africa than in North Africa. But in North Africa, that is what they use. So do we start a marketing campaign on that and trying to reorientate people? Do you think that could be a possible solution?
No, I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think to your question about whether it is a problem of a lack of education or marketing, I think it's both. I remember it was in the 90s. I remember so Professor Radion, eminent professor of architecture at the University of Lagos, just a wonderful, wonderful man, legend, the only architect to be an MON. But he tried in the 80s, he tried to, convince his clients. He was very enthused with, in fact, I can attribute my love for Earth to his support for the material. But I remember hearing from one of his old friends who said that Professor Radion tried to get his clients, he tried to convince them that he would design a house for them with earth, and none of them wanted to. So you're right in terms of there has to be education. They go hand in hand. There has to be education about the virtues and sustainability in energy efficiency, but even in beauty aesthetics of Earth. Demasun Woko, in his 80s, he won the most prestigious prize in this year's Venice Architectural Biennale. Demasun Woko, who wasn't trained as an architect, legendary figure. He's now getting his laurels, but he was trained as an artist. He went to ABU Zaria. This is a man that has been awarded by the international community in architecture, and he was one of the few, like Professor Radion, who were designing with earth. Go and look at his projects in Ibadan, but also in the East. So you're right. There has to be kind of education. You know, I've just reduced Earth to unfounded, I might add, but reduced Earth to poverty. But this goes hand in hand with marketing. If I would wager that if a great marketing enterprise was done, the production of magazines, of websites with snazzy looking buildings made out of earth, right? I think people will change. I think that people will have to see it, right? The marketing apparatus has to be so on point, right? It has to be so good that I think once Nigerians see, right, they will change their mind. So you're right, it's both. It's a lack of education, right? But also, marketing. I think unprecedented strategies in marketing have to take place to change the mind. So that's what I would say. It's a question of both. And so I would definitely agree with you that marketing, but even Professor Aradian, right? Demason Woko has been writing. I just acquired about 3 of Demason Woko's books.
Yeah.
He's been publishing for a very, very long time. And in addition to creating architecture, same thing with Professor Radion. He published as well as he created architecture. And if it was not for the writings as well as the buildings that these people produced, I think that made a way in re-educating me about the virtues, right, of earth. And so there has to be, when going back to what you said about education, this goes back to what I said about how many architecture critics are there in our Nigerian dailies, right? How many columns are focused on architecture, housing alone, right? We're not using that public space. And I'm saying this to myself as an academic. I am implicated in this as well. That, academics are not using the public space as much as we should in order to persuade, to educate the public about the virtues of some of these alternative building materials. When one starts to think about alternatives, then we can start to speak about economics and how to tackle the behemoth, right? That is the construction industry as it is constituted now.
So I had an apartment in Tunis, in Tunisia, and this was started in front of me.
Okay.
6 months later, now to the average person who has never seen what their construction methods are like, they wouldn't know that this were built out of bricks. They see the ones like in the UK and all of that because you have exposed brickworks and that kind of stuff, for the facade. But for most people, they've never seen finishing like this using, red bricks. So probably a lot of people like myself, like yourself, we have to start engaging in putting this type of stuff out there and saying, look, this is what it is. I mean, I saw this being built and it took roughly about 6 months for them to actually do this. I've never seen a duplex built in Nigeria in 6 months. That's one. 2, on a building site in Nigeria, you're probably going to see maybe about roughly 60 people with different functions, running helter-skelter, carrying this block, carrying that block, that kind of stuff. And that tells you that there's a lot of money going into that particular project. Maybe much more than actually should go into it. when they were building these units that you're seeing, for each one of them, I never at any point in time saw more than 8 people on site.
Mm-hmm.
And that included the supervisor and the engineer that was in charge of the project. Never. I never saw more than 8 people. You wouldn't even really notice that there was a lot of work actually going on. And then in 6 months, boom, you have that. So in terms of the amount of labor, the amount of time, the amount of effort that goes into this construction project, these are all angles that people need to look at, because if we can actually build something like that in 6 months, then that means that if you can put the teams together, set up an effective process, then you are able to build 3-bedroom bungalows, affordable housing, 3 months for each unit. And you have so many people getting jobs, but they're actually getting jobs that they can earn well from, because they are building much more units. There are 60 people being on one site and sharing a pittance. I don't know. I keep thinking about it and I keep wondering, why does this seem like rocket science?
Well, I mean, no, thank you for showing me that. I mean, I think you are pointing to other things that we have to address, as a country, and just other things that need to be addressed, um, in the way that buildings are built in Nigeria, and what you described as opposed to what you showed in Tunis. I mean, I think the reality is that on many construction sites in Nigeria, of course, I know there are always exceptions, but there's a way in which the building process becomes an end to itself. Let's call it. Let's just call it what it is. The secondary goal is to complete the house, right? But along the way, right, let's be honest here and call it spade a spade. Other things like, just how wealthy certain people can become, just gets into sway,
Yeah,
right? And it almost, again, the secondary thing is just to have it on time, but the primary thing is to really just really acquire, right? To really just get out of this project and this process what one can get. And the reason why I'm saying that is that when the efficiency, when erecting a house um, in a timely manner is not the main goal, is the secondary goal, right?
secondary.
It becomes, then you start to see, Habib, the things that you're talking about. Now you see just all sorts of personnel, right? All sorts of people on the site and what have you. Let us not just go around the bush. Let's just call it what it is. I think that is part of the problem. That is part of the problem, and it's less about, again, just really doing the job in a timely fashion, so that other projects may come along the way, right? Than what you're describing. So I mean, that is something that sadly needs to be addressed. But that is part of the problem. I think that um, I mean, also there are just other things that need to be thought about, and I want to bring this back to the Indian example that I mentioned a little bit. A housing estate by the Pritzker Prize winner B.V. Doshi. It was a very interesting. I mean, in some ways, it's similar to what you showed me in the Tunis example,
Yeah,
where buildings were erected, and I'm sorry that I don't have an image to show you here. I actually teach, I've taught that housing estate in my classes,
Okay.
but there's a way in which the architect came up with designs that clients, inhabitants of this housing estate, could manipulate. They could erect a wall and erect other things to reconfigure um, the houses as they saw fit. And
So
so there was a way. Go
to
ahead.
to expand the footprints and all of that.
Exactly. Expand the footprints, add another level in terms of another floor and
Yeah.
what have you. I noticed too, just notice how flat, just the houses you were showing in the Tunis, the flat roofs and something like that. You know, that is something to think about. There's a way in which it seemed to me what you were describing and what it has in common with the Indian example I'm thinking about. There was a kind of approach, a kind of almost IKEA like approach, if you allow me to use that phrase, this
Yeah.
kind of ease of construction, ease of adding layers if one wanted to add layers. um, that is a very, very different mindset from what you're describing. Just the example where you have a lot of personnel and a lot of people on the site. So I would just say, I mean, I'm sounding like I'm repeating myself, but I would say that when the erection of a house in
Yeah.
a housing estate becomes the secondary thing,
Yeah. Yeah.
secondary goal. Well, I mean, there you are. You have the kind of problem that we're having right now. I mean, that's part of it. That's part of a mindset that needs to be addressed as well.
Oh yeah. Most definitely. So you have highlighted another thing now, which is basically the level of innate corruption that even we have, and we keep pointing at government officials and that kind of stuff. The lack of sincerity in most of the things that we actually try to achieve, which means that we keep creating a vicious cycle of problems for ourselves. Now, you can attribute a lot of Nigeria's problems to Nigerians, but somebody made a comment, so I'll just put that briefly on screen. One of the viewers says, I think it's a civilization, quote unquote, that have made us look at building with earth as poverty. Nigerians copy the West a lot, but right now the West is copying Africa. The West is now embracing sustainability too.
Well, I mean, I have no arguments there. I think the comment is spot on. I think that, I mean, Africa, there are some other continents, there's some other places in the, just non-Western world where sustainability has been something that has been done for millennia. So, but no, I think the comment, the commenter's point is spot on. And I think you're right that there's a way in which we have to make the changes. We have to look inwards. We have to adapt, right? We have to adapt. We have to look again at what architectural lessons we have carried with us from time immemorial. And we have to look again and just really appropriate those technologies. I mean to bring up Professor Aradian again,
Yeah.
because Professor Aradian did this. I mean, some of these things, some of these people, Nigerian academics, have tried to do this for a very, very, very long time. In the 70s, during Festac 77,
Mm.
Professor Radion curated a fantastic architectural exhibition at Festac called African Architectural Technology.
Yeah.
And what he and his American wife did, they got a Ford Foundation grant and they went to many countries in Africa, taking pictures of different types of architecture in Africa, making drawings, making models. And in that show, he got Unilag students to make the models, produce those drawings and photographs. And the crux of the show was to show the entire world that came to Festac that Africa has architectural and construction traditions that we need to embrace, right, and appropriate and think of creative ways to assimilate, update, or improve on that technology. He did that in the 1970s, right? And it was a show that I don't think it got the kind of coverage that it needs to get. It's still relevant. That show is still relevant today. So, absolutely, the commenter is right that we have to start to look inwards. Architects of the future, people in the construction industry have to do the courageous thing about by looking at construction techniques in
Yeah.
villages, in different places, and then thinking of creative ways to draw lessons and create technologies that are in spirit or borrow a page from those things. I mean, people are doing it in the West. There was a book that came out in the year 1999 or something called Biomimicry, right? That even went further, right? Where people were looking at nature. So, what natural systems can construction professionals and architects borrow from to create sustainable architecture? Hello, people have been doing it. Go to the east, look at Mbari architecture, right?
Yeah.
Mbari Shrine architecture of the east, where they were using termite hills to create Mbari shrines. They
Oh,
were
wow.
looking at termites. They were looking at the ingenuity of termites. That was biomimicry before people in the West coined the phrase biomimicry, right? So the commenter is right that but again, it's this sort of post-colonial mentality that you have to rival the West, right? You have to rival the West. You don't have to rival the West. Just be inspired, right, by your own, like what they're doing, be inspired by your own architectural traditions and think of creative ways as civil engineers, as architects, as construction managers to do that. The greatest architects, they experiment with different types of materials. We are not doing that. We're not doing that in
We're
Nigeria.
not doing that at all. Definitely not.
Yeah.
Now, based on this biomimicry and the comments from the viewer,
Yeah.
it reminded me of something that I saw. So I just have to quickly, pick out, that particular image. I don't know. Let me see. There you go. Now, this building burnt down and was rebuilt in 1636.
Mhm.
Now, if you take a very close look, you will see that it still has the same Mediterranean architecture, all the features and all that. Now, at the top, not at the very top of the building and at the
Mhm.
midsection of the building, first floor and top floor, they have water collection pipes. So there's a water collection system that actually sends the water into the well, excuse me, at the bottom right of your screen.
Mm.
1636. Now, this picture was taken in 2018. I took the picture myself in 2018. I went to visit it because it was the first madrasa. The madrasa is a Muslim Islamic school in Tunis. So it's a historical, place to go visit. And I was amazed at the fact that this building still stood. They had images, sketches of what the building was like back then. And it was the same thing. The very same thing. So it provided, shelter for people, but then they were still using common sense to harvest water, to be able to provide water for themselves for their domestic use. And we are busy building boreholes and erecting concrete slabs everywhere. at ridiculous costs, and we are still screaming poverty.
Yeah.
Where do we get off?
Wow. I mean, loaded here. I mean, the so because there are things, I mean, in what you showed, that madrasa, there are things that need to be highlighted just to emphasize your points. So you said from the 1600s
Yeah,
that,
that's the
you know,
stereo.
looking the same way, you can also suppose that the building traditions have been kept. That's why they're able to rebuild,
Oh yeah,
the same way. That knowledge of construction is still there, right? This knowledge has been passed down from generation to generation, right? So there's a continuing tradition, right, of construction knowledge, architectural knowledge. And so it also indicates that there are people, just to go back to what I said about just the passing down of knowledge.
yeah,
You're not looking for kind of technical expertise that is in the West, right, to be used, right, in a local context. You are looking at local knowledge, right, local construction knowledge that has been passed down, right, local strategies of the collection of water, right, efficiency, right, sustainability, right, as opposed to the ball you're talking about. I mean,
yeah,
these are things that the madrasa example that you are highlighting, these are the larger issues, and we're losing those. That's really, so it is why we are building buildings that are just really incredibly expensive right now. um Demasun Woko, just to bring back to Demasun Woko, I mean, in some of his houses, right, in the Delta area, there's a particular house where he has a house with a courtyard that collects rainwater in the middle, right?
middle.
Collects rainwater in the middle. So he has used some of those strategies himself. But he's a voice crying out in the wilderness. How many houses, right? How many architects are designing houses in Nigeria where rainwater is being collected, right, in the center of the courtyard or something like that? I mean, there are
I mean,
probably
nobody.
some.
If they can't use mud bricks, how can it possibly collect water in their? I mean, we look at it and we say,
Yeah,
even if we're taking water and putting into drums, don't put a drum where guests can see it,
yeah,
because it's supposed to, shape for us to actually show to the world that we are actually maintaining a certain level of sanity.
yeah,
I don't,
yeah,
I don't get where you're
yeah,
coming from. APT,
yeah,
all of that, to be honest,
yeah,
it's really
yeah,
amazing. Now,
yes.
sorry,
Go ahead. Go ahead. Go ahead.
if you're watching this and you have not followed or subscribed so far, don't worry, you're not paying anything. Just subscribe, just follow us so that more people can at least get to listen to what it is that we talk about, and it will also help the algorithms to help us so that more people can actually see us and all of that. And we'll be very grateful to you as usual. We're always grateful to you, our guests. So please go to any one of our social media handles, subscribe on YouTube, go to Instagram, Facebook, just do something, click that button, click the notification bell as well, so that you will always know when we come, on live. So sorry, Dr. Teriba, back to you.
No problem. No, I mean, I think that just to put a ribbon on, tie a ribbon on these points,
Yeah,
that I think, Habib, what both of us are describing, we're describing how the loss of traditional knowledge is creating scenarios where things are more expensive, where the implication, right, when one really thinks about the implication of building a house, whether it's in Lagos, whether it's in Abuja, Port Harcourt, or something, one begins to have a headache because one has to be one has to, what's the phrase? I'm looking for the fancy phrase. Maybe I should use something simple. But one has to just deploy, certain things that are just expensive. One
Yeah.
has to dig a borehole. One has to do this. One has to do that. And
Even the
what
roofing
have you?
system. Even the roofing system. You want to put
Yeah,
it's built in the country. You say you would put a pitched roof, which adds an extra maybe 5 million naira
yeah,
to the cost of
absolutely.
the work. And the roof
Yeah,
really truly does what purpose does it serve? It's just
yeah.
aesthetics. Nothing
Yeah, it's just
else.
aesthetics. A
It's just
particular
aesthetics.
type of aesthetics. Just a particular type, a particular type of aesthetics that says I have arrived. That is the kind of aesthetics,
That's it.
you're reminding me, do you know there are places in the UK? I'm not talking about London, no, I'm talking about mid-country, where you
Yeah.
have these old buildings with thatch roof, handsomely done. Okay,
Yeah.
thatch roof, and it's not just the UK alone. Who would dare commission a house in Lagos or in Abuja with thatch roof, right?
But even maintenance, even if it's even maintenance, you need to maintain the ones that we had before. So those houses, those cottages with those thatch roofs and all that, they are giving graded listing. So grade one listing, grade two listing, that kind of stuff. You can't change anything on the building. Some both interior and exterior.
Yeah,
But look at us with the modes. What's done with it? It's done. You have Lokoja, the colonial buildings in Lokoja, on the hill overlooking the Conway, of massive historical significance, is done. You know, the palaces of the areas in northern Nigeria. What do you see? So they've actually, renovated those buildings, the exterior walls, instead of maintaining the mud facade, right? And trying to maintain it. What did they do? Pulled it down more or less, or reinforced concrete, plastered, and then now did murals on them, taking away the originality of those things. Who is going to pay money to come to see something that is not the original? People are paying money to go to different parts of Europe to go and see castles that are 600 years old. And we have such beauty, such glorious beauty all over the country. And what do we do? The story building in Calabar is still there. Yes, they've maintained it as much as they can. So it's still, it's still rather presentable. But that's about it. I can't tell you anywhere else. We can't even
it's a
maintain
very
what we
good.
have.
No, I mean, it's a
It's
very
amazing.
good point. It's a very good point. I mean, I would just even add to what you're saying. I'll never forget, I was part of a conference, a Zoom conference at Unilag in 2020, so 3 years ago now. And one of the presenters gave a presentation about how there was one palace in Yoruba land where where certain columns made out of wood that were sculpted columns. And what I mean by that, they were columns, though, but they were columns that had human figures on horseback or something. There is this tradition in palaces, in some of the Yoruba palaces, old palaces, pre-modern palaces in southwest Nigeria, where you had some incredible wood carvers. I've often talked about one of them, the Olowe of Ise. He was a turn of the 20th century individual, remarkable wood carver. He did doors, but he also did columns, load bearing columns. What I mean by load bearing, that there were columns that supported parts of roofs and what have you, but they were also like sculpture, right? And sometimes you had a man on a horse, or you had sculpted figures of women as well. And the presenter was showing how some of those columns were being removed and replaced by Greco-Roman architectural columns that you normally see in a lot of houses, right, in VGC or what have you. And it almost broke my heart to see those columns, on the floor, those wooden columns lying on the floor after having been removed, right, being replaced by Greco-Roman column, by Greco-Roman, you know what I mean? Columns that you see, in Greek temples, Roman temples. They are part of the architectural lingua franca of any house you see, right? Go to Lekki, go to what have you, right? And it just broke my heart to see that. All in the case of catching up with the West, all in the case of, being up with the times. It just broke my heart. So that's just another ammunition for what you are saying, that we have a problem. We have a serious, serious, serious problem. There are people, just to go back to the other world, we say, right?
Yeah.
There are people, right? People of African descent, architects, I won't mention their names, but they're architects of African descent who are operating in the West, who are looking at the Olowe we say. They're looking at those columns and they are being inspired by them to create buildings in the West. We're not doing the same. Nigerians are not doing the same. So, I mean, we have a problem. We have a serious, serious problem where we think of, one of the things I often teach my students is that you have to not think of tradition as some unchanging thing of the past. Don't think of traditional architecture as something that just was in the past and that's it. Tradition, the word tradition means something that is ever changing. Tradition means taking something from the past and making it relevant. That is what tradition is. Tradition is not static. Tradition is alive. Tradition is moving. And so therefore, what we have to do as architects, right, and people in the construction industry, we have to look again, right, at traditional architecture and learn what lessons we can learn to solve the problems that are prevailing us in this day and age. And we're not doing that, right? We are turning deaf, right, to those lessons and those people who can teach us that kind of architecture that, if we look at again, can teach us many, many things. Those things have become mute because we don't have the ears to hear. We don't have the eyes to see, right? The madrasa that you just showed, that body of knowledge to rebuild something first in the 1600s that was the same as it was, it shows that knowledge has been transferred down, right? That's what it shows, right? That knowledge has been there. So that's what I would say. Yes, even the knowledge has been maintained. The building has maintained.
So not just what you said earlier on, when it comes to the issue of tradition, you can carry tradition and prop it up with technology. I'll go back to that initial post that I made on Facebook, looking at an architect, who had the depth of knowledge that you have to have this type of conversation. And a lot of people were encouraged to make comments. So there was one particular comment that somebody made. He's an architect. No, he's not an architect, he's a builder. A well-educated one. And he's still imagining having those mud pits. And if you had mud pits all over the country, blah, 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 what would it look like? And I was like, excuse me. Then there was another one that was talking about, so are you going to be focused on building bungalows? Because how do you want to build, multi-story buildings and that kind of stuff? I was like, now, I'll show you this. Of course, Dr. Teriba knows what I am showing, on the screen right now. But for those who do not, this is a decade of a building. And what you have there is red bricks. It's not rocket science, it's not magic. You have you have steel rods running through them, and there are columns there as well. So they're linked. Firm, you have a firm decking for the first floor. This particular building you're looking at went up 6 floors. So rather than making comments and arguing, what most of us need to initially do is first do a little bit of research. It doesn't have to be in depth. Just try to understand first what it is that you're talking about, and then if you're not having a conversation with other people, you will now realize that the little knowledge that you have, when you pair it with the knowledge that the other person has, you're able to come up with solutions to whatever it is. But if you don't have any knowledge, and then you now want to contribute to the conversation, the only thing you're going to be doing is causing confusion. You just be arguing. And that's why we have found ourselves where we are. We just keep arguing back and forth simply because we are talking about things that we have no knowledge about. So, Dr. Teriba, what do you think of this decade?
No, I mean, I think I couldn't have said it better myself. I think you put it very, very well. I mean, just there are other examples that I could even just indicate, different cultures have really explored the potentials of earth. Or I mean, you could even think about other materials as well, and they have found ways, right, of augmenting, right, perceived augmenting perceived limitations and
Yeah,
of some of these building materials. And so one, like you said, one has to really look. There are many, many examples of how earth, bamboo, I mean, just name it. One can think of many different types of materials, that have been used, in just a way that just defy, just their limitations. So, I mean, I think it goes back to something I said about just experimentation. There isn't a
yeah,
culture of experimentation, right, in the construction industry. Buildings are made out of the tried and tested, right? And, architecture that is always on the cutting edge. And I'm not thinking about cutting edge in terms of, I'm thinking of cutting edge in terms of experimentation.
yeah,
People have to be at the forefront. People have to forget about standards. I shouldn't say that, but maybe I'll say it. Forget about standards of the construction industry, but really just really experiment, right, with structural systems and all of that to just come up with different ways of doing things. Earth has been used a lot for different types of configurations. Bamboo, I mean, there are other things that I'm just not thinking of right now. But no, I think you put it very, very well that one has to, if one does an exhaustive study, just look at pre-modern architecture, period, in different parts of the world. Sometimes you have books that have such things, and you'll be amazed what people
yeah,
have done, right, with materials like earth to create the kind of structures. I mean, there are the Japanese, right? Just think about the Japanese. I think about the way they have used woods, right, to create multi-story structures, right? In some
yeah.
cases, without any nails. In some
Without
cases,
names.
right? So without nails, without nails. So I think more has to be done. It goes back to what you said about education. We need to educate ourselves.
Very
And
good.
professors like myself have to do a better job of educating the greater public about the potentials of these materials, how they're augmented, and what have you. So that's what I would say.
That's, I mean, I'm glad. I'm glad that if, everybody got something from this and you didn't get something from this, I was very upset. So I'm happy that you got that from, and you're saying that, it's time to look at things a little bit differently, which is the reason why we try to have these conversations, different angles, that you're not looking at, you start to look at. Hopefully, for everybody that's been able to join us tonight, we truly appreciate you taking out the time to join us. We truly appreciate having Dr. Adedoyin Teriba, who is an assistant professor of art history. There are other things that I would have liked to have asked, Dr. Teriba, but if I delve into it, we're not going to leave here tonight because Dr. Teriba is an amazing academic. He has a body of work that he and I, were talking about, very recently, just a couple of hours ago, and how he's using architecture in Yoruba speech. And like, what's that? Anyways, I'll save that for another time because that'll be another topic for another day. But Dr. Teriba, you can always just Google him. You'll find him. He's not a social media person. But if you have any questions that you'd like to ask him, if you need any pointers on, issues related to architecture, you could do. If you're looking for a consultant, if it's a case of now looking at it and thinking, okay, you know what, I want to set up my own small-scale brick factory, that kind of stuff. Just send us, an email, and we'll, get you in touch with Dr. Teriba, or we'll put his email in the comment section. And you could always reach out to him. Send him an email, that kind of stuff. If you have such a business proposal for him, he's a very busy person. It took us quite a lot of time to be able to track him down, to be able to bring him on here. So, Dr. Adedoyin Teriba, Assistant Professor of Art History. We're very, very grateful for you taking the time to join us tonight. For everybody that has joined us, you guys are all awesome. You are amazing. Thank you very, very much. We appreciate it. And we'll see you again very soon. In fact, because of Dr. Teriba, I think we're going to talk about philosophy the next time. Maybe we need to start from, the philosophy of the average Nigerian, how to think. And then maybe we'll now start to shift, not start seeing things differently. Good day, everyone. Dr. Teriba, thank you very much. Have a great night.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It was such a pleasure. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.